There's a moment that arrives maybe once every few decades in sports, a moment so rare that entire generations of fans get to experience it only once or twice in their lifetime. It is the moment when everything changes, when one person walks into a league and rewires the entire conversation around what is possible. We have lived through these moments before. We saw it when Magic Johnson fundamentally reimagined what a point guard could be. We watched Michael Jordan reshape the entire concept of individual excellence. We experienced LeBron arriving and forcing every organization to reorganize around his talents. And right now, at this exact second, that same seismic shift is happening in women's basketball. Except there is a twist to this story that makes it fundamentally different from all the others. This time, the player is not rising to her destiny. This time, the player is being actively suppressed by the exact people who are supposed to protect her. What is happening inside the Indiana Fever organization to Caitlin Clark is not a coaching disagreement. It is not rookie adjustment struggles or typical growing pains. What you are actually witnessing is a calculated, deliberate suppression of the most impactful player women's basketball has ever produced. The people responsible for this suppression are not some external force trying to tear her down from the outside. They are not rival teams spreading narratives or media critics with an agenda. They are the exact people who were entrusted with her development, the ones she was supposed to rely on most. Head coach Stephanie White, general manager Kelly Crosskopf, President Amber Cox, and her own representation. The people in her corner are throwing the punches. And if something does not shift dramatically in the next few weeks, we are going to spend the next decade asking ourselves how we watched this happen in real time and did absolutely nothing about it. To understand the depth of this organizational failure, you have to understand what makes Caitlin Clark uniquely, almost impossibly dangerous on a basketball court. She is not a traditional point guard. She has never been one. Traditional point guards facilitate within a framework. Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement. They work within the system, running plays designed before the game even started. Clark operates differently. What makes her genuinely dangerous, what keeps opposing coaches awake at night thinking about her, is something most players in professional basketball will never possess: the ability to command defensive attention from distances that seem almost impossible. She pulls defenders 30, 35 feet from the basket just by threatening to shoot. She doesn't even have to attempt the shot. The mere threat of her range forces decisions. And when defenders make that choice to come out on her, something remarkable happens that most basketball analysts still do not fully appreciate. The entire geometry of the court collapses in her favor. Every teammate around her suddenly has more space than they should. Double teams that were specifically designed to stop other players simply evaporate. The floor spacing transforms. She warps the offensive landscape just by existing in a particular spot, just by holding the ball 35 feet from the basket. It is almost impossible to teach this skill to another player. You either have it or you do not. It is something you are born with, something that exists at the intersection of range, confidence, and instinct. And in Caitlin Clark, it is as natural as breathing. So what does the Indiana Fever coaching staff decide to do with this rare, once-in-a-generation weapon? They construct their entire offensive system around post-entry sets. Let that reality sink in for a moment. Instead of building their entire architecture to maximize a player who creates double teams from half-court, they funnel the basketball into the post. They ask a player who can collapse entire defenses from the perimeter to stand in the corner and wait for touches that may never come. It is like buying a Ferrari and only ever driving it in first gear. The engine exists. The speed is there. The capability is absolutely there. But the person with their hands on the wheel refuses to let it breathe. And the players they are asking to anchor this post-heavy offensive system, that is where the basketball negligence becomes almost comical. Monique Billings is averaging less than 10 minutes per game. Less than 10 minutes. That is not a franchise cornerstone. That is a role player being asked to carry a structural load she was never built to support. Aaliyah Boston has genuine talent and real potential, but she is still actively developing her ability to finish through contact at the rim with consistency. She is not there yet. Even if she was, even if Boston became an elite post player tomorrow, Building your primary offense through her would completely eliminate the most lethal dimension of your own roster. You would not be playing to your strengths. You would be handing every opposing defense a roadmap to take Clark out of the game without fouling her. This is not basketball strategy. This is sabotage dressed up in a clipboard and a headset. This is an organization taking the most dangerous offensive weapon in women's basketball and asking her to stand still. This is incompetence masquerading as coaching philosophy, and the basketball consequences are immediate, measurable, and devastating. Every game Clark is forced to operate within this framework, she is playing below her actual ceiling. Every possession where the ball goes into the post instead of into her hands in space is a possession where the Fever are making a conscious choice to be less dangerous. But the offensive philosophy is only half of the organizational dysfunction happening inside that locker room. The rotation decisions reveal something even more troubling about how this coaching staff views their franchise player. There is a number that has become the signature symbol of the Fever's coaching failure this season, a number that appears in game after game, a pattern so consistent that it cannot possibly be accidental or coincidental. 6.5 minutes. That is the mark. That is the moment when Caitlin Clark gets pulled from games during the first quarter. 6.5 minutes into a 48-minute game. Think about what that timeline actually means. By the time she gets on the floor, reads the defense, picks up the rhythm of the game, feels the tempo, and begins establishing any kind of offensive presence, she is already being waved to the bench. She has not even scratched the surface of what she can do. She has not even found her footing. And yet the coaching staff's response is to remove her. This is not a tactical substitution. This is not a strategic timeout followed by a rotation adjustment. This is a pattern. A consistent, repeated pattern where the most dynamic player on the roster is pulled before she can create any real impact. And what happens in her absence is exactly what any basketball analyst would predict. Portland went on a 13-2 run the moment she sat down. 13 points in a matter of minutes. The entire game shifted on that single substitution. The game changed because she was removed. And yet the coaching staff's response to that reality was not alarm. It was not a panicked reassessment of strategy. It was not a recognition that maybe pulling your best player is causing problems. The response was justification. Stephanie White stepped in front of cameras during a post-game press conference and explained the substitution pattern. Her explanation was that Aaliyah Boston is on a documented minutes restriction due to her developmental phase and health status. That explanation is fair. That makes sense. It makes complete basketball sense to manage Boston's minutes while she develops and adjusts to the professional game. Nobody is arguing against a health-based minutes restriction. But then, in the same breath, White used that restriction to justify pulling Clark at the exact same time. Think very carefully about the logic being deployed. A health-based minutes restriction on one player is being used as cover to justify pulling your franchise player who has absolutely no such restriction. These are two completely different situations being bundled together and sold as a coherent, unified strategy. They are not remotely the same. When Boston sits for a rest period, that is appropriate development management. When Clark sits at the exact same moment, that is a rotation choice. It is a decision, and the decision is being camouflaged by the other decision. It is misdirection. When Clark sits, you do not just lose her scoring production. You lose something far more valuable. You lose the threat of her production. Every time she walks to the bench, opposing defenses relax in measurable ways. The double teams that were opening up her teammates disappear. The spacing that made everything work for the entire offense collapses. The entire offensive ecosystem that she generates just by being on the floor, just by existing with the ball in her hands, evaporates the moment she walks toward the bench. And then when she comes back into the game minutes later, she does not re-enter a game where momentum has been maintained in her favor. She has to restart an engine that was just hitting full capacity in the middle of a momentum swing. She is coming off the bench into a game that has already shifted against her team. She is entering against a defense that is now set, organized, and no longer terrified of her gravity. She is coming in cold. The continuity is broken. The rhythm is disrupted. The offensive flow has been interrupted. That is not player development. That is not strategic rotation management designed to help a young player acclimate to the professional game. That is coaching malpractice, plain and simple. And the most damaging part is that it is happening consistently, repeatedly, night after night. It is not an isolated incident. It is not a one-time coaching decision made under pressure. It is a pattern. A calculated, recurring pattern that tells you everything about how this coaching staff actually views Caitlin Clark's role on this team. But the rotation decisions are only the most visible symptom of a much deeper organizational problem. There is a philosophy underneath these decisions, and when you examine that philosophy, it reveals something far more troubling about the entire direction of this franchise. Then came the Golden State explanation. This moment deserves very careful, methodical examination because it reveals something far more troubling than a single bad rotation decision or a misguided substitution pattern. When asked about the substitution choices during a road game in San Francisco, a nationally televised game against a strong opponent, Stephanie White explained the reasoning behind the rotation decisions. Her explanation was that they made the substitution because they did not want Raven Johnson, one of their supporting guards, playing extended minutes in that hostile road environment without another primary ball handler on the floor alongside her. Read that explanation back to yourself carefully. They made a substitution decision directly affecting their franchise player, their most valuable asset, the player the entire team is supposed to be built around, based on concerns about how a supporting player would handle the pressure of a road game. Let that sink in. They limited Caitlin Clark's floor time in a meaningful game on national television to manage the comfort level and psychological state of a role player in a difficult environment. That is the official explanation being offered. That is the reasoning, and it reveals something profound about the underlying philosophy governing this coaching staff's approach. The underlying philosophy is protection over development. The instinct is to shield. The priority is comfort. And protection over development is exactly backwards when you are trying to build a championship contending team around a transcendent, generational talent. It is almost the exact opposite of what the history of basketball teaches us. The greatest players in the history of this sport were not shielded from hostile environments during their developmental years. They were thrown into them. They were tested in the fire. They played in the most uncomfortable road arenas, against the toughest defenses, under the most intense pressure, and they were forced to find solutions in real time with no safety net and no protections. Think about how Michael Jordan developed. He was not carefully managed in friendly environments. He was thrown into a league where he was physically attacked, where defenders tried to injure him, where every arena he walked into was a hostile environment. He was tested. He was pressured. He was challenged. And that pressure, that fire, that discomfort is precisely what transformed him from a talented player into the greatest basketball player who ever lived. Think about LeBron. Think about Magic. Think about Kobe. The pattern is consistent. The greatest players in basketball history went through trial by fire. They were not protected from it. They were immersed in it. That process is uncomfortable to watch. It is difficult. It looks harsh from the outside. But it is precisely how good players become great players and great players become legends. There is no shortcut. There is no protected development path that leads to championship-level excellence. You cannot develop a player for championship basketball by keeping them comfortable in friendly environments. It does not work. The game does not work that way. Shielding Caitlin Clark from a loud crowd in Golden State does not develop her. It does not prepare her for what is coming. It delays her. It postpones her readiness. It sends a message at a subconscious level that the organization does not fully trust her to handle what is coming. And what is coming? The playoff pressure, the championship moments, the arenas that will be exponentially more hostile than anything she has experienced in her young professional career, will not wait for the Indiana fever to decide she is ready. The basketball world does not operate on a slow, comfortable developmental timeline designed by a coaching staff that is more concerned with protecting supporting players than maximizing their franchise player. The basketball world operates at full speed with zero accommodations for players who were never truly tested. It operates with intensity and pressure and hostile environments as the default setting. When you have a once-in-a-generation talent, you do not protect her from the storm. You teach her to walk through it. You give her the tools to navigate it. You expose her to it in controlled ways so that when the real storms come, and they will come, she is already battle-tested and unafraid. You build her into a competitor who thrives under pressure instead of wilting when it arrives. Now, the part of this story that most people miss entirely, the part that the box scores do not capture and the statistics do not reveal, is what is happening beneath the surface where cameras cannot reach. This is happening inside the locker room. This is happening during film sessions. This is happening in one-on-one conversations between coaches and players behind closed doors. That is where the real damage is being done. That is where the real psychological harm is accumulating. And understanding this part requires you to think like an elite athlete, to understand what it takes mentally to operate at the highest levels of professional basketball. Think about what it does to the psychology of an elite competitor to be treated the way Caitlin Clark is being treated right now. You are the most recognizable player in your entire sport. You have already shifted the cultural and financial trajectory of an entire league. Sponsorships, television ratings, jersey sales, merchandise, everything changed because you walked in the door. You walked into your first professional season carrying the weight of a movement on your shoulders. You are not just playing basketball. You are representing something larger than yourself. You are the face of a sport's attempt to reach new audiences and new heights of cultural relevance. And every single time you start finding your rhythm, every time the game begins to open up and you feel like yourself again, every time you start playing at the level everyone knows you are capable of, you get pulled. Not for a specific tactical reason that was explained to you. Not because of a documented health concern like the one justifying another player's minutes restriction, but because of a substitution pattern that apparently just what the coaching staff does. The unpredictability alone is psychologically destructive in ways that go far beyond basketball statistics. Elite athletes operate on instinct. That is what separates the great ones from the merely good ones. They process information at speeds that cannot be consciously calculated. They see the game before it happens. They feel the rhythm before it establishes itself. They need to operate in a state of flow where their unconscious mind is faster than their conscious mind, where instinct overrides analysis. They need to feel free to make aggressive decisions in real time without a mental governor constantly second-guessing every move. They need to trust themselves completely, and they need to trust that their coach trusts them completely. When a player knows that she might get benched at any moment for reasons she cannot fully understand or predict, when the coaching staff's decision-making process is opaque and inconsistent, she stops playing freely. She starts playing carefully. She starts thinking instead of reacting. She starts running scenarios in her head instead of trusting her instincts. She hesitates before making aggressive plays. She overthinks. She second-guesses. She plays not to make mistakes instead of playing to make plays. And for a player whose entire game is built on split-second reads, on creative chaos, on the kind of instinctive decision-making that cannot be manufactured or coached, careful is catastrophic. Careful is the exact opposite of what her game requires. Then there is the public messaging. Multiple instances of coaching staff, comments suggesting the team plays faster, the team plays better, the team moves more efficiently with someone other than Caitlin Clark as the primary ball handler. Do you understand what happens when those statements are made? In a closed meeting room, that is a coaching note. That is internal feedback. That is a technical discussion about offensive flow. But in front of cameras, in front of reporters, broadcast to the entire basketball world, in front of competing teams, that is something entirely different. That is a public vote of no confidence. That is an institutional statement about your trust level in your franchise player. That tells her teammates how to evaluate her. That tells the media how to frame her. That tells opposing coaches exactly where the vulnerability lies in the relationship between the Indiana Fever and their own franchise player. It creates a narrative. It seeds doubt. It plants questions in the minds of people who are watching. It suggests that maybe this player is not as essential as everyone thinks. Maybe the team actually functions better without her. And those doubts and questions spread through locker rooms and broadcast booths and social media, and they accumulate. They build on each other. And the player who is the subject of those doubts can feel them even if nobody says anything directly to her face. Reports have surfaced suggesting the team's sports psychologist has been involved in conversations centered around getting Caitlin Clark to accept her current role with less friction, with less pushback, with more compliance. Think very carefully about what that framing actually means in the context of everything else happening. The psychological support system inside an organization is supposed to exist to empower athletes, to help them overcome mental barriers, to make them stronger competitors. It is supposed to be on the athlete's side. It is supposed to be an advocate for the player's growth and development. But if the sports psychologist is being used to convince Clark to accept a diminished role, if the therapeutic relationship is being weaponized to increase her compliance with coaching decisions she disagrees with, then the psychological support system has been inverted. It is no longer supporting the athlete. It is supporting the organization's management of the athlete. It is no longer helping her become a better player. It is helping her accept being less. That is not player development. That is organizational control. And it is absolutely destructive for an athlete who needs her competitive fire burning at maximum intensity, not slowly dimmed down to something safe and manageable. Every transcendent athlete needs great people around her. Not just talent evaluators and conditioning coaches and film analysts and sports psychologists. She needs fierce, aggressive, strategically brilliant advocates who understand exactly how much leverage their client holds and are completely unafraid to use it. She needs representation that does not just accept what an organization decides to do with her career. She needs people who push back. She needs people who demand more. She needs people who understand that the relationship between a transformative athlete and her organization is not a one-way obligation or a hierarchical structure where the team decides and the player accepts. It is a negotiation. A constant, high-stakes negotiation where the leverage is not evenly distributed, but it is absolutely real. And in that negotiation, silence is never neutral. Silence is always surrender. Silence says yes when you should be saying no. Silence accepts the situation when you should be fighting to change it. Silence allows the other side to dictate terms without any pushback. Silence is a form of agreement. And right now, the silence surrounding Caitlin Clark's representation is absolutely deafening. While the Indiana Fever front office has been allowed to publicly mismanage their most valuable asset without meaningful pushback, while hit pieces have circulated in outlets like USA Today framing her struggles as a player problem rather than a systemic coaching failure, her current representation under Aaron Kane has been essentially invisible. There has been no coordinated media response. There has been no public positioning to reshape the narrative. There have been no aggressive behind-the-scenes pressure on the organization to restructure her role. There has been nothing. Radio silence. Absence. The exact opposite of what a franchise player in this situation needs. Compare that approach to how the most powerful agencies in professional sports operate when one of their clients is being publicly diminished. A firm like Clutch Sports, Rich Paul's operation, does not wait for damaging narratives to solidify and spread. The moment a story starts gaining traction that threatens their client's position or reputation, the response is already in motion. Relationships with media contacts are activated. Counter-narratives are seeded strategically. The organization is quietly but unmistakably reminded of exactly what they stand to lose if they continue down a path that undermines the person generating the majority of their revenue, their relevance, and their visibility in the market. That kind of aggressive, proactive representation is not optional for a player in Caitlin Clark's position. It is essential. It is non-negotiable. Because the coaching staff's willingness to escalate these restrictive practices, to make public statements questioning her effectiveness, to use organizational resources to manage her compliance, has been directly enabled by the absence of any meaningful resistance. When there are no consequences for publicly undermining your franchise player, you keep doing it. When there is no one in the room pushing back on your rotation decisions, your post-heavy offensive schemes, your sports psychologist-led compliance campaigns, you keep doing those too. The organizational dysfunction currently suffocating the Indiana Fever exists in significant part because the people who should be fighting hardest against it are nowhere to be found. Now, let us zoom all the way out because this story is not just about one player and one organization, not just about internal Fever dynamics and coaching decisions that only matter if you are a basketball analyst. What is happening inside the Indiana Fever right now has financial and structural implications that stretch across the entire WNBA landscape. The people running this league need to understand the stakes before it is too late to course correct. Because the WNBA is currently in the middle of the most consequential period in its entire history, This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. This is the actual moment that will determine whether this league thrives or merely survives. Television rights negotiations that would have been completely unimaginable just 5 years ago are actively underway right now. These are negotiations that would have been impossible to imagine during the league's first 15 years. Expansion franchises are being added. New teams are joining. There is movement, growth, momentum. A collective bargaining agreement opt-out window is approaching. The players have leverage like they have never had before. The league is, for the first time in its entire existence, operating from a position of genuine leverage in conversations with major broadcast partners. Networks are competing for rights. There is money on the table. There is real bidding happening. And here is the crucial part that everyone connected to this situation needs to understand. Every single dollar of that leverage, every percentage point of those viewership numbers, every incremental gain in cultural relevance traces back directly to one specific thing. It traces back to the style of play that Caitlin Clark brings to the floor when she is allowed to play freely, when she is not restricted, when she is not pulled at 6.5 minutes, when she is not forced to run post-heavy offenses, when she is unleashed. NBC, CBS, and USA Network did not sign landmark broadcasting deals to watch conservative half-court post sets run against zone defenses. They did not pay significant amounts of money to see a team funneling the ball into a post player who is still developing. They paid significantly, they paid record amounts, for the deep perimeter shooting that makes arenas gasp. They paid for the no-look passes through traffic that dominate highlight packages and social media for 48 hours straight. They paid for the gravity-defying offensive plays that spread across platforms and drive viewership numbers upward. They paid for the controlled chaos that happens when you put a player on the floor who makes every single person in the building, the players, the coaches, the fans, and the cameras, orient themselves around her. That is what was marketed to them during the negotiation process. That is the product they were sold. That is what drove the negotiations to historic levels. That is what the ratings data has consistently validated every single time she has been allowed to operate without a leash, without restrictive rotations, without organizational limitations placed on her minutes and opportunities. And what are those broadcast partners receiving right now, in this moment, as the agreements they signed are being executed? They are receiving a diminished version of Caitlin Clark. They are receiving a player who gets subbed out 3 minutes into the first quarter before she has even warmed up. They are receiving a player who is being asked to run an offense that was not designed around her strengths and actively negates her greatest weapons. They are receiving a player who is visibly, unmistakably diminished when she is sitting on the bench, an expression on her face that communicates everything about the internal locker room dynamics without a single word being spoken. They can see it on the cameras. They can feel it in the energy of the broadcast. Network executives are not naive. They have their own analytics teams. They have access to the same data that fans and analysts have access to. They can see the correlation between Clark's floor time and the viewership numbers as clearly as anyone paying attention. They can track when she is on the floor versus when she is on the bench, and they can see how the audience engagement shifts in response. And what they are seeing right now is a product that is actively degraded relative to what they paid for, what they signed agreements for, what they marketed to their audiences. That creates friction. That creates tension. That creates conversations happening in network offices and broadcast partner headquarters. And if those conversations escalate, and there is every reason to believe they will escalate, the financial and reputational fallout for the Indiana Fever organization will extend far beyond a few bad press cycles or some critical media coverage. The WNBA built its current momentum on a specific promise to broadcast partners about what they would receive. And right now, one organization is breaking that promise every single game. Look at the schedule ahead. Look at the matchups that are coming down the pipeline over the next few weeks and months. Understand what they mean in the context of everything that has been building, everything that has been accumulating beneath the surface. The Indiana Fever are facing high-profile, nationally televised games against the Atlanta Dream and the powerhouse New York Liberty. These are not quiet mid-season games that disappear into the background noise of a long 80-game schedule where nobody really notices the results. These are marquee events. These are the games that get promoted weeks in advance by the networks. These are the games that drive the biggest single-night viewership numbers of the season. These are the games that end up defining how casual fans and mainstream media think about the league's overall quality of play. These are prime-time events. Games that casual fans will tune in for. Games that casual viewers might watch even if they are not regular WNBA followers. Games where the pressure is highest, the stakes are biggest, and the expectations are greatest. And here is the unavoidable collision that is approaching on the schedule, the clash of competing forces that cannot possibly coexist without something breaking under the tension. On one side, you have the coaching staff's stubborn adherence to rotation patterns that have consistently failed them. You have their commitment to a post-heavy offensive philosophy that was designed for a different era of basketball, a different set of players, a different offensive philosophy entirely. You have their apparent belief that pulling Clark at 6.5 minutes is strategically sound, that limiting her floor time in the name of managing Boston's development is a coherent approach, that the team plays better without her as the primary ball handler. You have that institutional commitment to those beliefs. On the other side, you have enormous external pressure to produce compelling, competitive, exciting basketball on the biggest stages of the season. You have network expectations. You have broadcast partner expectations. You have casual fan expectations. You have the expectation of the basketball world at large that when Caitlin Clark takes the floor in a nationally televised game, you're going to see the most dynamic basketball player in women's basketball playing freely. You have an expectation that the most recognizable player in the league will be featured prominently when the cameras are on and the largest audiences are watching. Those two things cannot coexist. One of them is going to break. One of them is going to yield. Either the coaching staff abandons the patterns that have been failing them, that have been consistently producing poor results, and finally unleashes the version of Caitlin Clark that the league was built to showcase, the version that drives ratings and engagement and cultural relevance. That would be an admission, whether explicit or implied, whether said in words or just communicated through actions, that everything they have been doing up to this point was wrong. That their approach was misguided, that their philosophy was flawed, that they need to fundamentally restructure how they operate. That admission would be difficult, that admission would be painful, but that admission might be necessary, or they double down. They keep running the same rotation patterns, keep funneling the ball into the post, keep pulling her at the 6.5-minute mark, keep managing her minutes like she is a fragile asset rather than an unstoppable force and a superstar. And they do all of that on national television in front of the largest audiences of the entire season, while the networks that paid for something completely different watch in real time as their investment underperforms. Imagine that moment. Imagine a nationally televised game against the New York Liberty, a primetime broadcast with massive viewership numbers, and the Indiana Fever run the same rotation patterns, make the same substitution at the same mark, and watch the game slip away while Caitlin Clark sits on the bench. Imagine the network executives watching that. Imagine the phones ringing in broadcast partner offices. Imagine the conversations happening in corporate boardrooms about what this means for their investment and their broadcast rights agreement. There's also a third possibility that nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone is thinking about in quiet moments. There is the possibility of manufactured rest days. Quiet, strategic decisions to sit Clark for a game here or there, framed publicly as load management or strategic rest, or giving her a break to prepare for the next stretch of games. But designed in reality to avoid the optics of another nationally televised coaching disaster. It would not be the first time an organization used the language of player health and player care to cover for institutional failures and poor coaching decisions. And given everything we have seen from this front office so far, it would not be surprising in the slightest if they went down that path. Whatever happens next, the pressure gauge inside that organization is at a level it has never been before. The tension is building, the external pressures are mounting, the internal contradictions are becoming impossible to ignore. Something is going to give. Something is going to break. The only real question that matters is what breaks first, the system or the player it is trying to contain. Here is the truth that history keeps telling us over and over again in sport after sport, era after era, decade after decade. Transcendent talents do not fit into existing systems. They do not mold themselves into pre-existing structures. They do not adapt themselves to fit organizational frameworks that were created before they arrived. Instead, they break the systems. They arrive at a place, a team, a league, and they force that place to reorganize itself around what they are capable of. That is not what happens. That is what must happen. The organization must restructure, not the player. The coaches and administrators who understood this reality, who had the vision and the courage to burn their old playbooks, to abandon their preconceived notions of how basketball should be played, and to build something entirely new around a singular transformative talent, those are the coaches we remember. Those are the coaches whose names are in the history books. Those are the organizations that built dynasties that lasted years, sometimes decades. Those are the teams and coaches that defined eras of basketball. Think about the coaches who understood this. Think about Jackson with Jordan. Think about Riley with Magic. Think about the organizations that restructured themselves around their transcendent talents and won championships as a result. Those coaches understood that their job was not to fit the player into the system. Their job was to build the system around the player. Their job was to create an environment where that talent could flourish. That required flexibility. That required vision. That required the humility to recognize that their preconceived ideas about basketball might need to be discarded in favor of something better. Conversely, the coaches and organizations that refused to adapt, that insisted on fitting a once-in-a-generation player into a structure that was already obsolete the moment that player walked through the door, history has been equally clear about what happens to them. They are footnotes. They are examples of what not to do. They are the cautionary tales. The talent eventually outgrows the container. It always does. There are no exceptions to this. The only variable in the equation is how much time gets wasted, how much damage gets done, and how many irreplaceable developmental years get burned in the process before the inevitable correction finally happens. Caitlin Clark is standing at the most important crossroads of her career right now. She's standing there earlier than almost anyone in the history of professional sports has had to face this particular moment. Most players who become superstars have years to develop, years to grow into their role, years where the organization gradually increases their responsibility and their minutes and their role in the offense. They have years where they can make mistakes and learn from them without the entire spotlight of the basketball world focused on them. Caitlin Clark does not have that luxury. She is a rookie. She is still in the phase where most players are simply trying to survive the transition from college to professional basketball, trying to adjust to the speed and the athleticism and the sophistication of the professional game. And yet, despite being a rookie, the decision she makes or does not make in the next few months will cast a shadow over the entire arc of her career. She can continue being the good soldier. She can keep accepting the rotations without public complaint, without pushback, without demanding change. She can keep running the offensive sets that neutralize her greatest strengths. She can keep working within a system that was not built for her and has no intention of being rebuilt around her. She can keep trusting that the process the Indiana Fever front office is so committed to will eventually produce results that justify the patience and the sacrifice and the limitations. That path is comfortable. It does not create conflict. It does not generate headlines or uncomfortable organizational conversations. It does not force anyone to confront difficult truths about their coaching or their strategy. It maintains the peace. It keeps things smooth, but it also does not lead where she needs to go. A player who accepts a diminished role long enough eventually becomes a diminished player. The system wins, the fire goes out, the competitive hunger gets suppressed, the edge gets dulled. And the version of Caitlin Clark that made the entire world stop and pay attention, that version quietly, slowly, irreversibly disappears. That is what history shows. That is what happens when a transcendent talent accepts being contained, or she can choose the other path, the harder path. The path that the greatest athletes in history ultimately had to choose when the organizations around them were not capable of matching their vision and their ambition. She can demand the structure that her talent requires. She can force the uncomfortable conversations that her current representation has been too passive to initiate. She can make it unmistakably clear to her coaches, to her front office, to her agent, and to the league at large that the arrangement as it currently exists is not acceptable and not sustainable. That path will create chaos. That path will generate criticism. Some people will call it selfish. Some will say she needs to pay her dues and earn her place in the system like everyone before her has had to do. Those people are wrong. Paying dues is a concept invented by people who benefit from the status quo to keep disruptive talents compliant long enough for the moment of opportunity to quietly pass. Caitlin Clark does not owe anyone a comfortable, frictionless adjustment period at the expense of her own development and her own legacy. The Indiana Fever did not discover her. They did not create her. They did not develop her through the years like they would a mid-round draft pick. They were lucky enough to draft her when she was already formed, already developed, already dangerous. And luck does not come with the right to suppress what you were fortunate enough to receive. What we are watching right now is bigger than basketball. It is bigger than rotation decisions or one coach's stubborn offensive philosophy. It is bigger than one team's internal organizational dynamics. What is happening to Caitlin Clark inside the Fever is a case study in how institutions respond when something genuinely transformative arrives and disrupts everything they thought they understood about how things are supposed to work. The cage built around Clark is real. The rotation limits, the post-heavy sets, the compliance-focused psychology, the absent representation, these are not accidents. They are systematic, and systems do not fix themselves. The Indiana Fever experiment in its current form is broken, not struggling, broken. And the longer it stays broken, the more of Clark's irreplaceable developmental years get fed into a machine never designed to produce what she is ultimately capable of. How long will the basketball world watch something extraordinary be made ordinary? Because the cage does not just need rattling, it needs to be dismantled entirely. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This conversation is just getting started.